Hello, welcome to Chapter 36 of the American Pageant for any U.S. history, high school, or college level. We're looking at Chapter 36. The Cold War begins from 45 to 52. Got Uncle Sam holding his money and then a Soviet bear ready to, slap someone. We're doing this in the middle of the coronavirus outbreak and kind of thing going on. So if you've been watching these videos, you're used to this. If not, this might be the way that education goes for the rest of the semester for a few weeks. So I hope this helps you. Today we're covering post-war economic anxieties through the post-war baby boom. So let's get into how the United States adjusted to coming back to peace after World War II. So it was a little bit of a difficult task to readjust to producing consumer goods, to shift from the wartime materials and all the tanks and the planes and the guns and all that stuff to making butter again. They always use guns and butter for the analogy. Was a difficult task. Inflation was bad. The government removed its price controls, and so prices shot up because of that huge influx of cash, of government spending, people making money, saving money, and so it led to prices really skyrocketing. There were labor strikes. The National War Labor Board made sure that most workers, except for the National United Mine Workers, stayed working during the war. As soon as the war was over, people wanted higher wages, especially with prices going up. They wanted better pay. And so there's a lot of labor strikes that swept the nation in 45 and 46. This is very similar to the post-World War I economy. A lot of labor strikes hit in 1919 specifically. New President Truman pressured miners and railroad workers to go back to work. It was crippling the American economy. He actually threatened to draft the strikers into the army in 1946. Whereas Theodore Roosevelt threatened to use the army to run the mines in 1902, Truman says, look, if you're not going to work, we'll find you a job. We'll give you a gun, a uniform, make you go live in barracks and things like that. And so it was a tough readjustment period. There's even some nylon riots, some pantyhose riots when they finally re-released pantyhose back to the public because nylons were being used for parachutes during the war. And so there was a severe shortage. There was riots over the prices and all that. You can look it up. I'm not making this up. The government seized and operated several mines during this time. And so some of the things to readjust, in 1947, the Republican-controlled Congress passed the Taft-Hartley Act over President Truman's veto, actually. It outlawed closed businesses. Basically, certain businesses were closed shop. You had to be a member of the union to get a job there. It greatly restricted the growth of unions, and it was kind of a blow to union membership and workers in the United States. The Congress of Industrial Organization, or the CIO, tried Operation Dixie, which tried to unionize Southern textile workers and steel workers, trying to get Southerners into the super union. It largely failed because of race issues, specifically in the South, between whites and African Americans. The Employment Act of 46 created a 3-member Council of Economic Advisors to advise the president on policies regarding employment, production, purchasing power. Basically, this whole thing was there to try to readjust back to the consumer economy. One of the great things that's kind of jump-started the economy was the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, better known as the GI Bill, or the GI Bill of Rights, which made money available to send former World War II soldiers to schools. And so really the modern foundation of the benefit package that is the military was part of this, that school would be mostly paid for. At that time, they'd pay for all the tuition, the books, even some rent help. I know that the compensation is not quite what it was now, but it's still pretty substantial. It's a really great way to go to college if you can't afford to go to it. It raised education levels across the nation. I mean, it just kind of raised, you infuse this much college education into massive, we're talking millions of people. It stimulates the construction industry. 8 million to 15 million servicemen, 8 million of the 15 million who served in World War II advanced their education in some sort through the GI Bill. And so it really helps create the economic expansion that starts in the late 40s and it continues for nearly 25 years. It's one of the great things that happened post-war in the United States. This is a picture from Penn State University. They had so many students, so many former GIs coming in that they didn't know where to house them, so they just threw up a bunch of trailers. I grew up in one of those. It's a trailer park. Yay. Fun. Let's go drink out of the hose. So from the 50s to the 70s, because of all of this, after this readjustment, this infusion of government cash, the end of the Great Depression, and then you have the raising of education levels of many, many millions of Americans, the economy grows steadily. And so this is a period of unprecedented growth. Incomes rose, the middle class expanded. Americans at this time accounted for 40% of the planet's wealth. This is the wealthiest the nation ever was in terms of purchasing power, in terms of income equality, and certain other factors like that. The highest standard of living was in the United States, and so you could buy the most stuff. And Americans really lived very, very well. It paved the way for the success of the civil rights movement because of this growing middle class, including African Americans. It funded new welfare programs, new education programs, because there's a larger tax base that the government could use those resources to help more people. And it also gave Americans confidence to exercise leadership in the international stage in the Cold War. America was doing so well, they had confidence. They didn't have to worry about, jobs and labor unions and wages like they did in previous generations. Now, because the economy was strong, Americans were making money, they could look outward to influence and help the rest of the world. More new jobs, most new jobs after the war were actually created for women. And so women are leaving the home more and more and working outside of the house. The service sector actually outgrew the industrial sector of the economy. America was still producing a lot of goods, but at this time, America was shifting towards the service economy where you're providing a service, whether it's medicine or education or whatnot, for the public. So this is the long-term growth of our real GDP. We have this depression, this dip right in here, and then we have the growth from World War II. We get a little bit of a dip in that readjustment, and then from here until about the Arab oil embargo, just unprecedented growth, and you can still see it's going up. It's pretty remarkable today. So why the economy boomed? Well, World War II. I mean, there was a lot of, the United States spent $320 billion on the war. That's a lot of money to infuse into the economy, into manufacturing, into wages, into you name it, farming. So there's also a lack of competition. With Europe and Japan in ruins from the war, the United States is producing everything, and there's not a lot of competition to go against us. To go against the United States, and people weren't buying German cars at that time because they weren't being made. And you also get the establishment of the permanent war economy, the production of defense contracts and defense, materials like planes and tanks and missiles and things like that. It doesn't really slow. Certain industries continued after the war, even with the war over, largely due to the Cold War and the proxy wars like Korea and Vietnam. The aerospace industries, you have the aviation and then aerospace, you have plastics, you have electronics, you have computers coming up, you have cheap fuel from the Middle East, and so productivity increases throughout the 40s and 50s and 60s. New technologies, you have computers being invented that could just speed things up and really make things a lot better. IBM, International Business Machines, was founded in 1955. You have a better educated workforce, and so because of the GI Bill, people could learn faster. They could be trained easier. There'd be less mistakes, making them more efficient on the job. You also have the mechanization and fertilizers increase the production of farms. There's more and more tractors and things like that, and so just production is going up, the economy is going up. There's fewer farmers, but they're growing more food. It's kind of just a wild time to be alive in the United States. This is kind of just showing the outlays. This is the defense budget, actually. How much of the defense budget is here. The percent of our budget, you can see it spikes in the 60s, actually, not during the World War II. And then what percent of the GDP? And so you have the height of the Cold War, and then it kind of declined, and then we get the war on terror going on and things like that. 7 good reasons for 2 Fords. I mean, America was so wealthy in the 50s that not only did you need 1 car, now families needed 2, but maybe 3 if that teenager needed a car to go drive around and go to the sock hop and go to the drive-thru and have a milkshake. The economic prosperity caused by the war enabled people to move throughout the country. So you get the continued shift of people to the west and to the south. The Sunbelt, as it's called, grew twice as fast as the Northeast. This is the 15-state area stretching along from the southern portion of the United States, from Virginia to California. California actually becomes the most populated state in the United States in 1963. It still holds that as an close. There's 40 million residents of California today. If California was its own country, it'd have the 7th or 8th largest economy in the world. People moved to the Sun Belt in search of jobs, better climate, lower taxes, cheaper real estate. The region received significantly more federal money than the North. That Roosevelt started that with the defense contracts that he disproportionately gave to the South to try to stimulate their economy. The Industrial Revolution region of the Ohio Valley, or the Great Lakes, the Rust Belt, declined because of this. And in the picture here, we have Willis Carrier really influenced, because living in Texas would not be viable if there wasn't air conditioning, or Phoenix or places like that. And so thank you, Carrier, for the air conditioner. This is the population increase from 1950 to 2008. And you can see that in the yellow, I mean, Nevada leads it here, 1,588%, because there was like 3 people in Nevada before 1950. But you can just see that, the South and then the West increase in population. These other places increase, except for West Virginia went down and D.C. went down, but not at the same rate. And that trend still continues to this day. And so there's cheap housing. The idea that you could mass produce cars and do an assembly line, William Levitt said we could do that with homes. We could prefabricate homes, build them all the same, plan out all these features, and so Americans could buy an affordable home with a couple bedrooms, with a fence, with a yard, with a garage, you name it. Levittown, New York, was the first of these. It was 17,000 identical homes built in 1947, and they were cheap, they were affordable, they were full of features, they had all the modern conveniences, and people wanted them. They wanted a new house. That was exciting. Mainly was whites who left the cities and moved into the suburbs. African Americans and other minorities had a hard time getting loans, and they were the red line areas where they were risky and they weren't allowed to get the loans as much, and their income wasn't as much. And so sometimes they call this the white flight, where the whites leave the cities to move into the suburbs. The Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, and the Veterans Administration, the VA, made home loan guarantees for people. The construction industry expands greatly in the 50s and 60s, and so this white flight left the inner cities in poverty. When the whites left, they took their jobs, they took restaurants, they took shopping, and so the inner cities fall into poverty and become desolate in a lot of places, to the point in the 60s you're going to see a lot of riots, especially in northern cities, because of poor living conditions. Migrating blacks from the South moved into the abandoned inner cities like Detroit and Chicago and even New York. And the FHA often refused black home mortgages for private home purchases. They were deemed too risky of a loan, and this is the practice of redlining, which was pretty racist, but whole sections, whole neighborhoods were forbidden from getting loans because they were deemed risky or suspicious, not suspicious, but susceptible to defaulting on their loans. This is a picture of a drive-through there in Los Angeles there. That looks good, like going to Sonic today, having a chili dog or something like that. This is the modern freeway in Los Angeles with on-ramps and off-ramps, which in the United States, we're kind of used to today. And this is people lining up in 1951 to tour a Levittown house, just to kind of see this new house with landscaping and all that stuff and a lawn, and it was pretty exciting. This is what the neighborhood looked like. You might get lost if you didn't have numbers on the home. And then finally, the baby boom. Americans were happy to celebrate the war being over, and so they showed their love physically, and oftentimes that led to surprises, and oftentimes marriage led to lots and lots of kids. It's an increase of nearly 20% of the population during the decade. 50 million babies were born after the war. In fact, the baby boom actually technically starts during the war, because a lot of soldiers didn't want to go die, without enjoying the fruits of I guess, love, is what we'll say. And so many times they came home to a surprise child they didn't know about, and so they wanted to make things right, and they got married and had more kids. People postponed having kids until after the war. They didn't do it in the Depression either, because they didn't have a lot of money. But now the war's over, the Depression's over, they have money, they have a house. Let's have kids. Let's just, let's live the American dream, the white picket fence, the 2.3 kids and a dog, and, mow the lawn on Saturdays and things like that. 2.3 is the average, by the way. We're not having 0.3 kids. That's weird. So they got extra money, there's better nutrition, better medicine, people are living longer, the babies are being healthier. There's such a boom in the kids, though, the schools can't keep up, daycares can't keep up, children's products, boom. There's a teacher shortage, there's a school shortage throughout the 50s. It also helped we have the Salk polio vaccine. Dr. Jonas Salk developed a polio vaccine, which, ended that childhood disease. It also inflicted President Roosevelt. School enrollment grows. This is the largest amount of kids born in America's history until the millennials. The millennials are almost as big as the baby boom. They're called the echo boomers sometimes. And so you millennials out there, you know who you are. I'm Gen X, by the way. It caused issues with the boomers in the areas throughout their lives. I mean, we're going to talk about the baby boomers. Even to this day, we're talking about them retiring. We have the typical okay boomer reply now because this generation is so old and out of touch now in 2020. And so, like I said, there's the echo boom of population in the 90s, which is you millennials. So that's all I have for today. If you have any questions, let me know. I hope you learned something.